Hansen, and today I'm talking with Annabelle. She's a super smart programmer, author, and senior lecturer at MIT. Her computer science videos on our channel have captivated millions of learners around the world. Today we talk about Python, growth mindset, and rubber ducks. I have to know what the ducks are now. I can't continue. Then I ask her, with the emergence of AI, do we even still need to learn how to code? What's the value proposition of learning a language like Python? Do we still need to do it?
So, not sure if this exactly answers the question.
Oh, tell me more. Find out her answer today on Chalk Radio. Hi, Anna.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. You're here.
Yes.
I'm so excited.
Yes, you too.
This is one of our pilot episodes for something new that we're trying, which is a video version of our Chalk Radio podcast. In many ways, it's an experiment. How do you feel about experiments? Are you an adventurous person?
No, not at all.
Oh, great. We're going to be great.
Yeah, I like stability and I like boring days.
Oh, well, I'm not sure we're going to have one of those with these ducks.
That's right.
So I actually don't know what the ducks mean.
Yep.
So I think you're going to tell me a little bit later. But I think we're in for an adventure and a little bit maybe of a choose your own adventure. Mm-hmm. So you're at MIT. You've been here for about 10 years. And you spend most of your time thinking about and teaching people who are new to programming, introducing them.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what that means to you, why you're interested in teaching, in particular, like people like me. What do you get out of that? And tell me about that experience.
So I recognize that I don't want everyone to become a computer scientist, but I do think that everyone should learn programming as a skill. So programming should become sort of like what math is now, where you kind of learn it in elementary school, and you obviously use it here and there in your adult life. But I don't know, when you've last used calculus, right? Like, we don't all need to become mathematicians after we've learned basic math. Similarly, I do think people should learn basic programming, but they don't have to become computer scientists. So the reason that I enjoy teaching students intro programming and exposing them to intro computer science is because it was really hard for me to understand programming when I first started, and I just always remember how tough it was. And I teach at MIT, and there's obviously a lot of really smart people here. And I think as you teach more and more, it's easy to forget how hard it was to start learning. And so, as an intro course, you might make the problems you give students harder and harder each year just because they get maybe boring for you. But it's not boring for the students. And I try to recognize that every semester. I just remember it was really hard for me. They've never seen this before. So it's really important to make sure that they have a really good experience.
You mentioned that when you first started programming, it was difficult.
Yep.
I'm wondering, what made it difficult? And then what are you doing in your teaching to make it less difficult?
I honestly don't know what made it difficult. The beginning was easy, just kind of understanding the basics of just, writing. The basics of creating an algorithm is basically three things. So the first is a sequence of steps. So step 1, step 2, step 3. Some sort of way to control the flow of those steps. So usually you go step by step, but at some point you say, well, if this is true, do this, otherwise do this. So like a branching kind of idea. And then there's also a way to control the flow by asking the program to repeat certain lines. So it's like, well, if this is true, go back and repeat this 1,000,000 times, which is very easy for a computer to do. So a sequence of steps, a way to control the flow of those steps, and then a way to stop. Those are the three things that make an algorithm. That's how you write a program. And grasping that was not hard. It was just sort of once you've gotten over that learning curve, it's learning sort of some of the more advanced concepts that were harder, some of the details for how that specific language works. So I started with Java, not Python, which was it's a lot harder than Python. There's a bunch of details that you need to think about there.
So I had the opportunity to watch some of your lecture videos.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And I noticed that you make space and time for students to practice, right in the class itself.
Definitely, yes.
Outside the class as well, but in the actual space where you're teaching. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, why you do that.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this before. I sort of see programming like math is now, but this will be, many years from now. It's a skill that people need to get that they don't have yet. And so if we think about the way we learn math in school, it's a lot of practice, right? You just always constantly practice adding, subtracting, multiplying, right? The kids. Yeah. So I think it's very important for students to actually get the time to do that practice. The way I run the class is sort of a flipped classroom or a blended learning style where students watch sort of the basics through video first. And then in the actual classroom, we do active learning. So I go over maybe something that's a little bit more confusing, and then I give them time to break with the hope that me forcing them to have them actually start coding, they'll be able to see, I totally understood what she was talking about in the video, and I can totally code that. But then when I'm forcing them to actually do it, starting with a blank slate, it's pretty daunting. And so I want them to get over that bump where it's like you have a blank piece of, blank editor or whatever, and then you just have to start writing something down. The more you do it, the more you feel comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. So there's all these breaks for all these activities that I try to keep the class lively, of course, and kind of indirectly have them practice these skills, like just write something down.
Yeah, and also that does two things, I think. It de-emphasizes perfection. You're like, this is practice. Like, yep. I think like an artist, right? So just like get a sketch, write a few lines, like just get something down.
Yes.
And then we can improve it.
Yep.
And then that speaks to something else you've mentioned before, and that's like growth mindset, and that programming is not like a gift and you have it or you don't, but it's really something that can be developed.
Yeah, a lot of, you see some people who are really good at programming, they didn't get good just because they had that skill. They were born with it, right? There's a lot of growth mindset involved in that. And anybody can reach that level of being good at something, programming included, just by lots of practice, trying different things, challenging themselves. So not just sticking to things that are obviously way too easy, because then you'll never grow. But you kind of, like, I don't know if you know this, the state of flow. It's like this chart where you kind of want to be in this like middle band, but kind of oscillating between doing things that are too easy and then challenging yourself and doing things that are a little bit harder. You don't want to always do two things too hard, because then that's discouraging and you'll stop. But you don't want to do things that are always too easy, because then you'll never grow.
I wonder if we could write an algorithm for staying in the flow. Yes. Like it tracks like, this is too easy for you.
Yeah, so
like get in another.
A lot of the education platforms, right, are trying to give students, based on their responses, even in math questions, right, they'll be like, this student totally got all these, let me give them a harder one. And it's like, that was too hard, let me.
Yeah. How did you find your way to programming? Is this something that you've always wanted to do, or did it develop along the way?
So my parents immigrated from Romania, and we immigrated to Canada, and my dad was an electrical engineer, and then he went into software engineering. And being an immigrant parents from Europe, we were highly encouraged, my sister and I were highly encouraged to get some sort of engineering job, right? So it's just what is done. And so computer engineering or computer science, something along those lines, seemed to be the best option, given sort of where things were going in the future. This was the 90s. So just the beginning of the internet, the beginning of all that, right, that boom. So my dad recognized that was sort of what the future would be. And he said, you should probably learn to program and potentially go, and probably go into that sort of career. And I wasn't super interested in anything else, so I just said, sure. And so he taught us Java when I was about 12. I have a picture here.
Yeah, let's see it.
Okay, and it's in this really cool frame.
Oh, I love that frame.
Okay, very fitting. And so this is very 90s. Right?
I love
this
everything
exudes
about it.
90s.
Yes.
Peak 90s right there.
Uh-huh.
So we've got the room with the computer, right? Like as was in the 90s, you all had like the room with the computer.
Yes, yes.
And then like the big chair and the side ponytail or whatever. That's
probably
me
the
on
scrunchies.
the left there. That's me.
Oh.
Yep. And that's my sister on the chair, sitting on the chair.
Yeah.
And that's when we first, or maybe before, like very close to the time that we had first started programming. My dad just said, here's some really basic things. And then I only got to the if, like the branching part of the control flow. I didn't really get to the repeating part of the control flow. So I made this choose your own adventure program where it was like, I forget what it was, like get out, exit a castle or whatever it was. And it was just like a bunch of if, else, if, else, if, else, if, else, if, like something like that. It looked really ugly, but I had a lot of fun doing it.
But in a way, you're helping people choose their own adventure today through programming, like gaining independence, critical thinking, doing things that they rely on other people to do, like they can do themselves. Like that's kind of incredible that you do that.
It's pretty fun. That's what I get out of it. Like I said, I don't want people to become computer scientists. I just want to empower them to, I don't know, like if they want to make their own app, they can totally do that using really basic computer science skills. Or programming skills, not necessarily computer science skills, but yeah.
So, controversial question. I asked you before the show a question, and I have not seen the answer yet.
Okay.
But the question was, in an environment when there are coding tools out there that allow people to build things, what's the value proposition of learning a language like Python to do that? Like, do we still need to do it? And what's the value proposition of doing it? So you're going to reveal your answer.
Okay, I'll reveal my answer. So not sure if this exactly answers the question, but I said trust but verify.
Oh, tell me more.
Okay, yeah, I've definitely used GenAI tools before. And even for really simple things, it can get it wrong, especially mathematical things. And even programming things. And so I have sort of, I would say, a basic knowledge of programming. And I have to interrupt you.
I would say it's a little more than basic for everyone out there. More than basic. Continue.
And so I was able to start with what GenAI gave me as a program, and kind of tell, in this particular test case, it doesn't really work that well. And I didn't have to go back and ask it to fix it because that requires a lot more sort of back and forth with prompting. And I was able, to just fix it on my own. It wasn't that hard of a fix. And, as soon as you go back and prompt the Gen AI again and again and again, you start to introduce sort of variability of English language, right? When you're talking to someone online, it's really hard to tell what they mean, or, right, there's all these double meanings. And Gen AI is all probabilistic. So they're basically going to, pick the highest probability of what you mean. And then when they give you answers back, again, they give it to you with whatever the highest probability for the next word to be. That's what they spit back at you. So as soon as you introduce sort of that prompting back and forth, it can introduce errors that potentially stack on top of errors, misunderstandings, and things like that. So having a really basic knowledge of programming could allow you to maybe start with a piece of code that the Gen AI gives you back. So you're not starting with a blank slate. It's not super daunting to write it yourself. But you start with something and then you potentially test it and then debug it and then, figure it out. Okay, now I trust that it works well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like the ability to verify is the human component.
Yes.
And that is sort of what creates the balance with AI. Like if you let AI make all the decisions, then you've lost your self-reliance and you can't choose your own adventure because you're going to get a bunch of errors and it's going to lead you down the wrong path. So you need the knowledge to be able to choose a path that makes sense. Yeah. I have to know what the ducks are now. Like I can't continue. So.
Okay.
And a pig. Was that like noisy data or
this is not noisy data?
Okay.
So, every semester when we run our classes on Intro to Programming and Computer Science, there is one particular class that is on debugging.
Okay.
Which is the process of, you wrote a piece of code,
right,
and it's not running as you expect it to. So how do you fix it? That is the debugging process. And so a lot of times, a bunch of the errors might be things that you can easily fix, but most of the time, your program runs fine and it gives you an answer, but the answer is not what you thought it should be. That's kind of where programming is kind of different than English, for example, because in English, if you write a sentence, somebody else can interpret it however they'd like. Like one example we give to students is the chicken is ready to eat. What do you think about when I say the chicken is ready to eat?
Well, I'm a vegetarian, so I don't want to actually eat the chicken, but I would, because I'm a vegetarian, I assume the chicken wants to eat his food.
Okay. There you go. But I would assume I enjoy meat. So my take on that is I have a chicken on the table and I'm going to eat it. Right? So there's two interpretations to that. But when we write code, there's only one way to interpret that piece of code that is written. Right? So that's where things go wrong in our code, because we're like, well, it should work because in my mind, when I kind of thought about it, it's supposed to give me the right answer, but it doesn't, right? And so obviously the program is the one who's wrong because the computer is merely following the algorithm, the set of instructions, and there's only one way to follow those instructions. That's basically what that whole class is about. And then I bring out this big box of ducks and I say, programming is actually kind of creative because the solution to a problem, you could brute force a bunch of things, but oftentimes the solution to a debugging problem is just to take time away from it and then potentially explain exactly what you think the code is doing to someone who knows absolutely nothing about programming. Oh. It could be you.
Yes, I'm available.
Or it could be a rubber duck.
Oh.
So this is called rubber ducky debugging because it's an inanimate object that doesn't know anything about programming.
Right.
And it forces you to scrutinize every single line of code that you wrote, even ones you think are correct. Most often, it's the ones that you think are correct that kind of are the issue. It's kind of like, where did I put my glasses, right? And you spend a long time looking for them and they're on top of your head. Yep. It's that exact feeling. It's like, where is that error coming from? And it's going to be something super simple. So the rubber duck is what helps you figure that problem out because you're explaining it in very grave detail to something that doesn't know. And if ducks are not your thing, there are frogs
and
pigs.
Of course.
Or friends, if you want to explain it to them.
But friends can be judgy.
Friends can be judgy. Yes. So I used to explain my code to my son when he was 1. Yeah. When I had issues because he doesn't know anything about programming.
Right. And so it's the act of talking it through. But you said it has to be in great detail.
Yes, you can't skip because because you already, clearly your code is wrong because of you. And so, and so don't skip any details, right?
I feel like this is very much like life outside of academia. Yeah. 90% of the time, the problem is probably you, and it's like you have to figure out how to interact in the world or with others.
Totally. So I brought all these ducks, a wide variety. Yeah. So now I have a question for you. Uh-oh. Which duck would you like to keep? This is a hidden personality test.
Oh.
No, it's not.
We'll probably have to cut this because it might take a long time. I would, this guy. This guy. Yeah. He's a little bit offbeat.
Yeah.
Eye-catching. And I feel like I could explain stuff to him. Yeah. I get to keep him?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. That's so great.
And you put one for the set as well.
Really? Yeah. Oh, gosh. Does someone from the crew want to, pick a duck for the set?
You took the one I would have picked.
Oh no.
All right, then.
There's another Mohawk guy right over there.
Yeah. We'll go 2 Mohawks.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
What a gift.
So you can use it for programming if you decide to start, or as you said, and even in your day-to-day life, you can, if you just explain the problem to, something that doesn't judge or.
Yeah. This idea of taking a break.
Yes.
the process of programming itself seems quite intense. There's like an image in popular culture of like a person working alone in the dark, like with a hoodie and like tap, 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 for hours on end. Like that sounds intense. So there's two pieces. Like, is that accurate? And two, like, do people work in isolation like that, or is it more collaborative?
So I tend to encourage collaboration.
Okay.
I have certainly put a hoodie on and the hood on in the past, just like a leave me alone kind of state, mostly for, homework and things like that. But for students learning to program, I definitely encourage collaboration because it's when you talk to somebody else, you kind of see their viewpoint. And in programming, I know I talked about like an algorithm, but for a particular algorithm or even just to solve a specific problem, there's a ton of ways to solve it. So I learn from in the classroom when I ask students for how did they solve a particular problem after I give them some time to think about it, they have so many different approaches to it that I would never have thought of. And it's important for students to see all these different approaches because my way might not be the way that they think to approach the problem. So I encourage kind of working together, especially as you're learning. Now, after you find your groove, maybe it's not necessary, but.
Yeah, as an outsider to this, I didn't realize there was such room for divergent thinking. Mm-hmm. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
But the taking a break, so especially at a place like MIT, like I don't know if like taking a break is on the menu, really. But it should be, I'm guessing.
It should be, yeah.
And then I'm wondering if you can talk to us about like the thing you created in the world to help people take a break and why it's important.
Sure. So this was a project I just had an idea. I was like, let me just make a coloring book. Like, one of those coloring books that you just kind of doodle into. Yeah. And I thought, let me just make it computer science themed. And so each one of these is, like, here's a circuit and it's like, here's a network, right, of connected people. And then here's a matrix kind of thing, right, with bits. And so it was just kind of all these ideas from computer science. And the hope is that if you are stuck and you don't have a duck, right, then you can take a coloring book. It doesn't have to be this one, but just something that gives your brain a break. But it's this idea of mind wandering. And this is an idea from psychology where mind wandering is not bad. Like if you're folding laundry, right, you're doing a very repetitive task. Your brain doesn't have to super focus on it. And so that's when inspiration comes because you're kind of subconsciously thinking about other things, maybe problems that you have or, things that you're worried about. And that's kind of when solutions come, just like, when you're taking a shower, that's mind wandering as well because you're doing a task that you already know how to do. You don't need to dedicate any thought to it. So your brain kind of dedicates thought to other things that might be worrying you or on your mind.
That's great that you've created that. Do you feel like programming is, like what's the percentage of logic to creativity when it comes to programming? Are we like 50-50, 80-20,
Interesting.
60-40?
Maybe 50-50, I would say. I think creativity comes into the process at all the different levels. So when you're coming up with a problem or something that you want to solve using programming, right, you have to be creative, right? So just coming up with that is mostly creativity. When you're deciding how to solve the problem or how to write the code, sort of maybe what algorithm to use or how to structure it or like what pieces to use and where, that requires some creativity, potentially, putting things together that you might not have put before, pieces of programming concepts together that you might not have put before. And then you're obviously going to run into an error after you write the code the first time. Yeah. And so then tons of creativity comes into play there. With, drawing or talking to a duck.
I'm liking programming more and more, I have to say.
I don't know. Once you're programming, it's kind of like reading a really good book. Like you're in this Zen space where you're just like, yeah, this is working. Like I totally see where this is going. Like I know what I want to write next. Like the code just kind of fits together. So just like being in a good book is awesome. Wow. And then the more you program, the more you want to program because you're just gaining these skills along the way. So it's like I play video games, so you're just constantly like looking for new ways to level up, but there's no cap.
It's really fascinating because unlike video games, most of them, like you could use open source coding languages and financial barriers don't come into play to get that area for growth and that dopamine hit of like leveling up. Increasing your skills. It's
just kind of a different, like you said, it's a growth mindset, right? It's a different way of it's different fun.
It's a different fun.
It's a different fun.
I'm like more and more, I'm like, maybe I want to try this fun.
Well, there's a book right here.
Get Programming, Learn to Code with Python.
Yeah, so this I wrote a while ago. It's a book made, lots of things claim to be for beginners, but I wanted to write something that is actually for people who have never programmed before. So I think we don't even get into writing code till like chapter 7 or something like that. It's mostly kind of just setting up motivation, but not boring. Like I wanted it to read like a novel, right? Like you're just like, I'm just following along. So if you want to start, you could also, you could try this book. You can keep this copy.
Oh my gosh, I have to tell you a secret.
Yes.
So I requested this through interlibrary loan at my home library. And I asked one of my family members to pick it up. And I was like, just so you know, it's really for me. Like, because they would be like, why is she getting this book? This must be the wrong thing. I was like, it's not a mistake. Like, it's actually for me. But I didn't really believe that. But now I feel like it is for me.
Oh, great.
Like, I do want to read it now and learn.
Yeah, anybody can start for sure.
Yeah, that's just great. Do you have any like hot tips for newbies who might want to start, or even people who are like deep into programming, deep into the hoodie already? Like things you're interested in reading or you think other people should view or listen to start or continue their journeys? Mostly tips for
newbies, I would say.
Okay.
Don't get discouraged. Learning curve is steep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It sucks. But
can I text you when I...
Yes, you can text me.
Thank you. If the duck doesn't work.
If the duck doesn't work, yeah. No, you're learning a new language. Like, it's called a programming language, right? And it's basically learning a new way to write things that you already know how to do or how to write in English.
Yeah.
You're just structuring it in a completely different way in a different language. So the learning curve is steep, but don't get discouraged. With Gen AI tools now, though, it's easy to get started, right? That's not from scratch. So like I mentioned earlier, if you're stuck on a problem, just prompt it to give you a solution and then work on the trust but verify piece where you'll actually get valuable experience debugging, right? Because you already start with a piece of code. So like the confidence level is already kind of there. You're like, okay, I'm not starting blank. And then you can, try to fix it or agree that it works. And both are really valuable skills to practice as beginner programmers.
I love the idea of starting with code and practicing debugging.
Yeah.
That feels like low stakes and doable.
Totally.
Yeah. What have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
I want to know what games.
What
games you play?
Oh my gosh. Like video games?
Yep.
I like driving a lot, so I drive in the real life.
Wait, you do not. You said you don't like being stuck in traffic.
No, I don't like being stuck, so I like to drive.
Oh, I see.
So I also enjoy driving games.
Okay.
Not just around the track, but like through random city streets and things like that. Escaping the police and, like the usual.
You have a whole other side to you.
Like Need for Speed?
Like GTA.
Yeah.
Okay,
GTA played, Need for Speed, yeah. I have the setup with the wheel and
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for being here. I learned about myself. I learned about programming. I have a whole new worldview on what is possible with and through programming, and that's just an incredible gift. And I'm so glad we get to share that with a lot of people who might also take that gift and run with it. So thank you.
It's awesome. Glad to hear. Thank you for the chat. This was awesome.
And thank you for the duck.
Yes.
I'm Sarah Hansen, and today I'm talking with financial economist Andrew Lo, whose videos have been viewed millions of times on our channel. I ask Andrew how he makes a topic like finance accessible to everyone.
It's amazing how bad we are as Homo sapiens in managing our finances.
We also get personal about his own learning journey.
I have a learning issue. It's the mathematical equivalent of dyslexia, dyscalculia.
You do? And I get his answer to the question, should I use ChatGPT to plan my retirement? All this and more on Chalk Radio. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us today.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
For a long time, I've thought that if I don't have an advanced degree in mathematics, that I probably don't have a place in finance and probably shouldn't be thinking about it much. But I'm wondering if you might prompt me to think differently.
Well, not surprisingly, I have a very different perspective as a financial economist. Someone once said that to a person that has a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I'm guilty as charged. I learned early on in life that virtually everything at some point or another ends up being about money, particularly with regard to any kind of innovative pursuits for entrepreneurship or career-wise. At some point or another, you're going to have to deal with money. And then you need to speak the language of finance. Yeah. So that's what really motivated me to learn how to speak that and then ultimately be able to develop new words and sentences in that language.
Yeah, it is a new language. And it seems like it's something that everybody can learn, no matter where they're starting from.
Absolutely.
You've contributed to OpenCourseWare. Your videos have been watched millions of times. And you seem really good at making finance accessible to people, no matter where they're starting from. I'm wondering what it is that you do that allows that to happen. Have you done any reflecting on that over the years?
Well, first of all, it's a great honor to be part of OpenCourseWare, and the fact that it does reach people all around the world, regardless of cost or access, is really wonderful. And the reason that I was so pleased and honored to participate in that is because I really feel like everybody should have access to this knowledge at different levels, of course, but we all need to know a little bit of finance. And I think that early on, I was really drawn to this field because of how impenetrable it was, and at the same time, how important it is. Growing up, I just remember always hearing my mother talk about finances and some of the challenges that we were facing. And I think that really made me hyper aware of the fact that it's really a necessary part of life. Sometimes, unfortunately, too much a part of life. And if we don't understand it, it's very easy to end up being taken advantage of or not being well prepared for the kind of things that finance helps you deal with.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. When I go to the grocery store and see cereals for over $6 and eggs sometimes up to $8, I mean, what are some theories of modern finance that everyday people like me could apply or think about when I'm faced with those situations?
Wow. Well, there's a whole bunch of ideas and important notions that we can use in our everyday lives. One of the key notions is that there's a trade-off among everything that we do and everything that we purchase. Far too often, we tend to compartmentalize, and we have a mental budget for certain activities, as well as other budgets for other activities, and we don't want to allow them to mix. But sometimes, if you can think a little bit more broadly about the fact that we have a given set of resources, and we have to allocate them across lots of different activities, and there are interesting financial ways of making those decisions, we can actually come up with better outcomes. One example that I think most people are aware of is borrowing money to buy a home or buy a car. That is basically moving money from the future, our futures, to our present. We're borrowing. And sometimes we need to put money today aside for our kids' college fund or purchasing a car in the future. That's an example of moving money from today to ourselves 2 years from now or 3 years from now. So this notion of being able to move money around and making sure that you don't lose a lot of it in the process is part of the language of finance. And that's something that all of us can benefit from.
Yeah, it's so interesting. The idea of having more flexible understanding of your resources and how they might move across categories.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the heart of it, it's really all about control. But I think not enough people understand how finance works so that ultimately it ends up ruling their lives as opposed to allowing them to use finance to achieve the kind of goals that they really want.
So, Andrew, before the show, we asked you to respond to a question, which we will now reveal the answer to. So the question was, should I, Sarah Hansen, use ChatGPT right now to plan my retirement? What's our answer? Not yet. Okay, please explain.
Not yet, because large language models are not yet ready to be able to do delegated financial decision-making for us. Turns out that saving for retirement is one set of activities, but then spending while in retirement, that's a whole different set of activities. And many of us have become good at saving, but we've been such good savers that we forget that at some point we need to spend. and we have to spend at the right rate for the right things at the right times. So what my colleagues and I are trying to understand now is not only what those optimal decisions are. I think we now have a lot of information about that. There's been a lot of research done on that. But the more challenging issue is how do we communicate that to people who don't have any finance background and moreover can't afford to hire the financial advisors that some of the higher net worth individuals have access to. So we're working on an AI solution, an AI financial advisor that can satisfy the most important criterion of financial advice that regulators impose, which is something called fiduciary duty. A fiduciary is somebody who is appointed to help you further your goals, will look out for your best interests above and beyond their own. And so very often people get a little bit concerned about financial planners and other people in the financial industry because they don't want to be taken advantage of. And there are many good financial planners out there, but not everybody can afford one. So the question is, can you, for those people who can't afford financial planning and for the financial institutions that don't want to spend their resources of financial advice to those who aren't going to generate enough commissions for them, for these people, can we come up with financial advice from an AI platform that satisfies the definition of a fiduciary, some program that you can trust to look out for your best interest? We're not there yet. However, I believe that everybody should use large language models to help them think through retirement issues more seriously. For example, ask ChatGPT, what are the biggest issues that I need to focus on for my retirement? How much time do I have? What kind of ideas and products and services should I make use of? How do I get better financial information? How do I learn more about these problems? All of those things, I think ChatGPT can do a pretty good job at, but I wouldn't let it make your decisions for you.
Real question for you. I know a lot of times when I put in a prompt that's within my domain of expertise, some of it will be good, but some of it's kind of garbage and not all that accurate. So as a person who doesn't know finance, how do I know I can trust the answers that are coming back, even about those general type of questions?
Well, so that's really why you need to have additional time and effort employed in thinking through these issues, not just by yourself, but with friends and family. So we need human support for thinking about how large language models can work either well or in some cases not so well. And in any case, if you are planning for your retirement, at some point or another, you're going to have to engage with people from the financial institutions. They will be able to help deal with some of the so-called hallucination problems with these large language models. But the answer is like anything else that we do. How do you know that your doctor is always giving you the best information? Doctors are very highly trained, but they do make mistakes. So get a second opinion, get a third opinion, talk to your family members. Ultimately, you're going to be responsible for your own decisions. But the more informed you can be and the more you can check the accuracy of the information, and that information can come from humans or from chatbots, I think those are the ways that we've developed for making sure that we make the best decisions possible to get a better handle on this.
Right. And I assume part of the idea would be to start this in your 20s, if you can. Start learning and start using these applications to really begin to save.
Exactly. Many people don't realize that the decisions that they make early on can have just tremendous consequences 30, 40 years from now. We now know that about health. We know that if we don't eat right, even as a teenager, we can affect our health when we get to middle age. The same thing is true about our finances. If we make bad financial decisions early on, it could end up having repercussions far beyond what we typically are able to measure. And so that's really the purpose of having some kind of support, some kind of advice that can actually look 40, 50 years ahead of a teenager.
It's kind of interesting because at least in the US, or at least in the cultural circles in which I grew up, it was sort of taboo to talk about money, how much you make, how much other people make, how you're budgeting. Have you found that in this context?
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the reasons why you want to have a fiduciary. You want to have somebody you can talk to about your deepest secrets, your financial goals, your constraints, the concerns that you have about losing your job or not being able to find a job, and be able to get honest advice about what to do about it. Many of us have good friends that we can rely on for that. But if you don't have a friend who has financial expertise, what do you do?
Yeah.
So the hope is that maybe a platform, a reliable AI platform that is able to serve as a fiduciary can really help individuals with all of their concerns.
Yeah, it's going to be a game changer for sure. What are some of the dangers, pitfalls, or challenges that might come with leveraging AI to give financial advice to people who do not have financial expertise?
Well, any great tool can easily be abused. And I think we have to worry about the fact that if we have a financial planning tool that is AI driven, can that be abused? What if we were to ask this AI to engage in illicit activities for our financial betterment? Is that something that we should be able to do, or is it something that the AIs should guard against? You get into all sorts of tricky ethical questions about how these tools are used. And so I think that those of us who are developing the technologies really require spending more time thinking about the ethical dimensions. That's not something that you typically focus on in your research, but for us now, given how far AI has come and what it can do, we have to be much more proactive about thinking about these unintended consequences.
Yeah, and just how fast everything is changing. The technology is so fluid and so fast, and honestly, not all that transparent most of the time.
Yeah, that's a concern that I think most people don't really appreciate yet. It's true that there's always been technology that has made advances and as a result has created winners and losers. Yeah. When the horse-drawn buggy gave way to railroads and then eventually to automobiles, people lost their jobs and people had to be retrained. Right. But there is a big difference between that technology and the current set of technologies. And it's exactly what you said. It's about speed. Mm-hmm. The fact is that right now, AI is moving at such breakneck pace that within a very short period of time, we can actually have large parts of our population unemployed. And the hope of retraining them in time for them to make a difference for their lives can be very challenging given how quickly things are moving. So I think that's the one concern that the AI researchers are thinking about. We don't have any good answers yet. And one of the answers that's been proposed, which is to slow down the rate of progress, right, that's almost never possible. Even if you want to do it, even if you have legislation, there'll be people that will refuse to abide by that because legislation is not going to stop that kind of innovation. It's not going to stop people from having ideas and wanting to implement them.
Yeah. The idea of people being put out of work with the advancement of these technologies is hugely concerning. And I know one that you're concerned about because it seems like in everything you do, it all comes back to people and the impact on people. I'm wondering where that drive comes from. Where did your interest in leveraging finance to positively impact people's lives come from? Because it didn't have to. There's a lot you can do with money and not worry about positively impacting people. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I have to say that that was really not something that I had planned. Much of my early career was focused on applying mathematical and statistical models to investment problems, developing trading strategies, risk management policies, various kinds of systemic risk measures. It was really all geared around the amazing impact that this technology could have on the field itself, on finance, making finance better. And in some of the things that I did in practice on the commercial side, started up my own asset management company and ultimately implemented some of these strategies for various kinds of hedge funds and investors. And at some point, it was very satisfying, but at some point I started to wonder whether or not, this was it. This is, what I was meant to do. And around that time, it's about 20 years ago, a number of friends and family all developed cancer at the same time. Within 7 years, 6 people close to me all died, including my mother. I really never dealt with death up close and personal before that. And so it was a big wake-up call. And through that process, realized that finance plays a pretty big role in cancer drug development. I was pretty naive at the time. I just thought that if there was a patient in need and there was some great technology that could help that patient, that somehow magically money would just come sprinkling down and develop the drug. But when I looked into it and talked to my colleagues here in Cambridge, it became very obvious to me that that was not the case, that there were many examples of good drugs that could help lots of patients that will never, ever see it to market because there was not enough financing to bring that to the patients. So that's when I started thinking about how finance could play a role in that. And it was actually totally selfish. I wanted to figure out how to help my friends and family and how to get better drugs to them. But in doing so, it just made me realize the power of finance and the responsibility that we have, given that we understand the kind of things that other people don't, about how to finance certain kinds of projects, about how to bring money to a particular area and really make it go faster, that we also have a responsibility to take some of these ideas and implement them for those really high impact, high societal impact kinds of pursuits. So I started with that, and then one thing led to another, and I began thinking more broadly about how finance impacts society in general, and realizing that there are many things that we can do to further all sorts of different goals: climate change, energy transition. There are so many different issues that really are crying out for new business models and financing strategies. And these are well-known tools that all financial economists know, but we haven't really spent time thinking about the applications. So that's been a really rewarding aspect of my current focus.
Yeah. Could you give an example of how a different business model might radically change the climate trajectory that we're on?
Sure. Let's talk about energy transition, because clearly we are not in the process of transitioning very quickly.
That's right.
In fact, right now, about 82% of the world's energy usage is in the form of fossil fuels. I think that might be down from 83 or 84% 10 years ago. It's not enough. And we're not making a difference fast enough. A number of people who know a lot more about the issues than I do have said that we're not really right now in the business of transitioning, because it's not as if we're declining our usage of energy. If anything, it's growing. Right. So what we need to do is to come up with new sources of energy addition as opposed to energy transition.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so what do you do with that? Where do you go? There are 3 totally green sources of energy that my colleagues tell me right now that are not in the renewable space. Obviously, solar, wind, hydro is important, but they're not always there when we need it. We need to develop better battery technologies, and that's all happening. That's good, but again, not enough. So if we want to speed up the process of energy addition, we need new sources of green energy, and there are 3. There's nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, and geothermal. And all of these should be areas that we pursue. And so imagine if we could support all sorts of different investment projects in all 3 areas and really make a concerted effort to develop these new sources of green energy. That's an example of what finance can do, but we need to develop the political will to be able to do that. And even part of that can be hastened by finance, because if you can show that governments can actually save money in the long run by investing in these, if they can get a good rate of return on these investments, they're much more likely to be able to write the checks that we need now.
Yeah, it really does all come down to money.
Unfortunately, in most cases, that seems to be true. But fortunately, the world has become wealthier. And largely that's happened because of industrialization and the innovations in technology that we have pioneered. But the wealth is not equally spread. Yeah. There's definitely winners and losers. And I would argue that the wealth is not necessarily being allocated in the most efficient way. If we were to change some of that allocation, we could actually get better outcomes for everybody. Nobody has to lose.
So it all sounds so logical when you explain it, but then you introduce humans. Talk to me about humans.
Human behavior is one of the most interesting and most confounding aspects of what I do in finance, because we can write down all these wonderful equations that predict various kinds of opportunities for financial investments. But at the end of the day, you're talking about people.
Yeah. And
people can react. Sometimes they can overreact. For example, during the pandemic, the stock market lost something like 30% in a matter of a few days.
Wow.
And right, if most of your retirement is tied up in the stock market, that was a really big hit.
Yeah.
So a number of people responded by what? By pulling out their money from the stock market, putting it in cash. That's in and of itself is not necessarily a bad decision. The problem is that many of these individuals, they took too long to put the money back into the stock market and they missed the rebound, which actually happened just a few weeks after that 30% decline. The market went right back up. And if you had taken a vacation between, middle of March 2020 and middle of June 2020, if you had taken a vacation and done nothing, you would not even have noticed that the stock market moved.
Yeah.
It just went down and then back up. So I think that understanding these kind of dynamics is important because we often allow ourselves to engage in behaviors that can be really counterproductive. And that's part of what I do as a finance professional is to understand how human behavior factors into this. And it's amazing how bad we are as Homo sapiens in managing our finances. And that's one of the reasons why I do what I do. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. You have a hypothesis. What is it called?
So my hypothesis is the adaptive markets hypothesis. And it was developed in contrast to one of the most popular theories in my field called the efficient markets hypothesis.
Okay.
That's a theory that says that markets always and everywhere reflect all available information. And that means that the prices that you see are generally correct. And it turns out the efficient markets hypothesis is not wrong. It actually works most of the time, but it's not complete. It doesn't work all the time. And for the times when it doesn't work, where human behavior overwhelms the kind of rationality that you typically see in the markets, that's where you need to understand how the mechanics of human behavior interacts with the beautiful logic of financial markets. That's the adaptive markets hypothesis.
Yeah. So as a fellow human, what can I do to counteract my own irrational tendencies?
Well, the first step is to recognize that this is an issue. So if you recognize that we all have this problem, that's the first step in recovery, in trying to understand how to deal with it. The second step is to do scenario analyses in our brain. So one of the most magnificent gifts of human evolution is the ability to engage in abstract thought, in hypotheticals.
Yeah.
We can hold in our mind all sorts of what ifs.
Yes.
What if I decided not to go to work today? What would happen then? What if I decided to become a doctor, a lawyer? What if I decided to save money so that my kids can go to college? Those kinds of what ifs, we can often work out in reasonable detail in our heads and then pick the what if that is the most attractive. So right now, if we're not in the middle of a financial crisis, we can do the what if and say, what if it turns out the stock market crashes by 20%?
Okay.
Given my age, given the likelihood that it's going to come back, because based on the last 100 years of history, when the markets go down, eventually they go back up. It takes a while, but we can actually see when things are recovering. What if I decided not to sell out everything? What if I decided to wait and see how things go? What if I were to wait 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? Can I afford to wait? By doing those kinds of what if analyses, we can go a long way towards preparing for these kinds of events.
Okay.
And this is where financial planners are really helpful.
Yeah.
They have a lot more sophisticated what ifs than you and I might be able to come up on our own. And there, I think we can get AI to play a role, because AI now with large language models are remarkably good at coming up with all sorts of interesting what ifs. And so to be forearmed is to be forewarned is to be forearmed.
We have a lot of YouTube comments pointing out that you tend to make finance very accessible through your lectures. And I'm wondering if you could articulate what it is you think you do that opens the door for students in your classes and around the world when they watch your OpenCourseWare videos.
Well, first of all, thank you for that observation. I'm really humbled and grateful for that. If that's true, it's because I often develop my lectures with an eye towards being a student myself. I was a high school student in New York City at the Bronx High School of Science, a school that specializes in STEM, and wonderful education that money didn't need to buy because it's a public school. And I learned more from my classmates in Bronx Science than I think I did from any other time in my educational career. It's a phenomenal school. But one of the things that I learned from wrong science that wasn't quite right, and this is my own fault, I identified intelligence with STEM.
Yeah.
So if you were smart at Bronx Science, that meant you were good at science and math. I mean, we had history, English, social studies, all of those other fields, but those weren't the real focus of the kids that went there. You went there because you wanted to study science, math, and engineering. And it wasn't until I got to college that I was completely disabused of that notion. And it happened because I met somebody who was completely innumerate. I mean, he wasn't even able to take the introductory math class in college and needed my help to get through it. And so I would tutor him every once in a while. And, he would eventually learn, but it took him a while and it was never easy. He really sweated it out. And ultimately, I think, passed with a C or something. And yet,
May or may not have been that person, but go.
Well, the thing about that person is that he was one of the smartest people I ever met in college. And I didn't expect that. And let me explain what I mean by that. We'd be sitting at dinner, and no matter what the topic of conversation was, politics, religion, music, anything that you would talk about other than mathematics, he was just incredibly well-informed, articulate, and extraordinarily analytical. So that really threw me for a loop because, again, analytical, math, but not in his brain. So he ultimately went to law school, became a very, very well-respected attorney, and he could argue anybody, into the ground because he had a mind sharp as a razor blade.
Yeah.
How is it possible that somebody could be so smart and yet innumerate? That was a big wake-up call for me, and it pointed out the fact that there are different kinds of intelligence. So up until recently, when we think about artificial intelligence and computation, it's all computational, quantitative.
Right.
For the very first time, and this is why I think large language models are such a breakthrough, we are now confronted with a very different kind of artificial intelligence. This is intelligence that is like my friend in college. It becomes analytical, but in a way that uses language, not numbers and equations. And so I think that large language models is a different type of AI than what we're used to. That's what makes it so powerful. But it does have some weaknesses, just like my friend who, if you asked him to prove a very simple theorem in calculus, he'd sweat bullets doing it. But he was incredibly intelligent in other ways. And so I think that opens up all sorts of new insights for me in terms of my own students, myself, and how we think about intelligence, and sometimes how limited we are in thinking about intelligence. We measure intelligence with tests, reading comprehension, vocabulary, and mathematical problems. But I wonder if there's many forms of intelligence that we're not capturing with those tests, and there are whole swaths of society that we have somehow neglected and underappreciated because they have an intelligence that we don't know about, we can't measure, but we really could benefit from.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I used to be an elementary school teacher, so I saw the ways in which schools pinpoint intelligence and measure it and leave out large groups of people.
Yeah.
So we're on the same page there.
Well, speaking of elementary school, that was one of the important and formative experiences of my life. It turns out that in retrospect, I have a learning issue. It's the mathematical equivalent of dyslexia, dyscalculia.
You do?
Yes.
Wow, that is so surprising.
Well, people say that because of what I do now. Yeah. But it was definitely the case that math was my worst subject. And, for an Asian growing up in New York City in the 1970s, that was not easy.
Wow.
So it wasn't until I went to the third grade that I finally found a teacher that recognized something in me, Mrs. Barbara Ficalora, third grade, PS 13 in Queens. And she knew that I was struggling with math, but yet she also saw that I was really curious. I would always enjoy going to the library once a week. I would take out a stack of science books and read them and be really interested in that. And so she tried to boost my confidence by making me the class scientist.
Okay.
Now, I didn't know that position existed. I certainly didn't apply for it. But what it meant was that I got to demonstrate one of these science experiments that I was concocting at the back of the room every free period I could get, and just talk to the whole class about, how to make a battery out of lemons and magnets. And I think it was that experience that allowed me to get through my elementary years, despite the fact that other teachers that I had who were not so supportive were pretty discouraging, and to me and to my mother. Back then, there was no diagnosis of ADHD or dyscalculia.
Right.
So, I basically soldiered on until I went to high school at that Bronx High School of Science I mentioned.
Right.
That was in the 1970s when New York City was undergoing this radical experiment called the New Math. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it was a widely renowned failure because it was replacing the basic concepts of algebra, geometry, and trigonometry with all these mathematical concepts of groups, rings, fields, isomorphisms, and other transformations. And while mathematically it was more rigorous and intellectually more pleasing, most of the New York City school teachers were not prepared to teach in this way. And so for most schools, it was really a failure. But for me, it was night and day. I came from being a C student in math to an A student overnight.
Because it was more analytical and less focused on
numbers. No numbers. I to this day, I have a hard time memorizing numbers. I never memorized the multiplication tables. I still have trouble with 6 times 7. I have to actually do the calculation in my head, and it takes me a little bit longer than most people. But when you replace numbers with equations, that was like a huge relief. It's like, wearing shoes that are 2 sizes too small, and then you take them off and you put on shoes that are just exactly the right size. It felt wonderful. And because I struggled as a student with my own learning issues, I could tell the difference between good teaching and bad teaching. And of course, for a while, I blamed it on myself. But then once I learned a bit more about my own learning issues, I began to understand what certain things would allow me to see a concept versus other things that would confuse me. Now, when I write my lectures, I often have to step into the student's role and ask myself, if I didn't know anything about this, what would be the fastest way to get me to have some kind of a grasp of what it is that I'm trying to teach? And again, looking at it from my own lens. The other part is that I've had the great gift of having a number of really incredible teachers. When I was a high school student, my calculus teacher, Mrs. Henrietta Mason, was amazing. When I was a college student, Saul Levmore, Sharon Oster, Herb Scarf, amazing. As a graduate student, Andy Abel, Jerry Hausman. I remember all of these teachers' names. It's because they just made a huge impact on me. They changed my life. And so part of why I spend time on teaching, and I think this is another aspect, some of my colleagues are so focused on research that they feel like they can't afford to spend time on teaching. But because I remember what it was like as a student when faculty didn't take the time to try to explain something in a way that would be more understandable, I decided to spend the time on working on my lectures. Someone once said that great writing is not writing so that other people can understand. It's writing so that other people cannot possibly misunderstand.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a very difficult standard to adhere to. But I think that's the same with teaching. Teaching is lecturing so that students cannot possibly misunderstand. And that does take a little bit more time. But, when you are able to land a concept with an audience, there is no better feeling from my perspective. It is, it is like, I don't know, gymnasts, hitting a perfect landing, ice skaters being able to do a triple axel without falling. For me, that is, just an incredible feeling, a rush that I can communicate something that somebody didn't understand. And now their faces light up and I get it now. I mean, and they will forever, from that point, they will forever have that to use and to benefit from. And also one of the things that makes me particularly grateful to OpenCourseWare is that it is the great equalizer. There are so many people that can't learn on a schedule and that have all sorts of issues that don't allow them to excel in a classroom with 30 other kids. And yet they're perfectly intelligent, in some cases super intelligent, but they have these challenges. OpenCourseWare gives them a platform at least to be able to learn at their own pace, to be able to stop the video, to think about it, to start it up again when they're ready. And there's nobody looking over their shoulder seeing how well they're doing relative to their competitors. changes the learning field, and I think gives opportunities that want to be able. So I can't tell you how honored I am to be part of this and to be part of the institution that came up with this platform and basically gave knowledge away to the rest of the world.
You brought something with you today.
I did. So, when I was asked to come on this program, you asked me to bring a meaningful memento, something small that I can carry.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, that was a terrible assignment. It just took me a long time because, what should I bring? Little art objects that my kids made, they're very dear to me. My high school diploma. But I decided to bring the most important reason for where I am today. And this is a picture of my mother.
Oh, that's
so
lovely.
I mentioned that, we grew up in New York City. We were a single parent household. She worked one job with overtime, to be able to raise 3 kids by herself. I was the youngest of 3, and instilled in me and my brother and sister a love of learning and the importance of hard work and focusing on the longer game as opposed to short-term issues, which was ironic because most of her young life as a mother was focused on trying to make ends meet. I would remember conversations about finance pretty much every single month, and it was tough because we did not grow up with a lot, and she was divorced, and that was a time when it was very difficult to survive as a single woman with 3 kids.
Yeah.
But she did an amazing job, and so I owe her a lot.
So if she was here with us now, what would she say to me about balancing the meet ends meet with the long game?
Yeah, well, I don't know that her advice would be something that anybody would or could do because she sacrificed her career for us. She was a lawyer by training, left China when the Communist Revolution took place, then married someone who was not ideal, an abusive husband. Took a long time for her to see that and get divorced as she did. It was a very messy divorce. And because he was a foreign national and ended up being a diplomat, he was also, the best thing about that marriage was that he was an absentee father because he was abusive when he was around. And so she dedicated her life to her kids and, held a menial secretarial position despite the fact that she was educated in law from China. And ultimately, I think, really put the 3 of us through school so that we could have the careers that we do now. I don't know that that's the right advice in general for women that are in that position because I think there has to be more of a balance. But for her, it was just really important for her kids to reach the career goals that she set out for us.
What's her name?
Julia Yao Lo.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I really enjoyed getting to know you, and you've completely changed my perspective on what's possible in terms of my relationship to mathematics and to finance.
Good. I am honored to have played that role. Thank you.
Let's get started. This is 1401 microeconomics, and I'm Professor John Gruber. Now, a couple notes about the course. There's a distinct policy angle to this course. I think, personally, what makes economics most exciting is you can use it to think intelligently about the problems that policymakers face every day as they try to decide how to make the economy work the best for its citizens. In fact, I teach a whole course about this called 1441, but I'm going to bring some of those insights into this class and use policy-based examples and things like that to try to motivate and organize our thinking about economics. Lastly, 3 points about my teaching style. First of all, I don't write everything on the board. For the freshmen here, we're not in high school anymore. You need to pay attention and listen to what I say, not just what I write. So it's important to remember that. The second point is, as you can tell, I talk really fast and my handwriting is really bad. Okay? So please, please don't be afraid to ask what the hell I just said or wrote. Okay? If you don't know, chances are at least 40% of the class doesn't know either. We'll learn later this semester about the concept of public good. A public good is something you do which has a personal cost and a social benefit. I understand raising your hand in a class as large as this can be intimidating, but remember, in doing so, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping your fellow classmates. So please don't lean and whisper loudly, "What the hell did you just say?" to the person next to you. Raise your hand and ask me, because if you didn't understand, many other people didn't as well. More generally, it's hard to get class participation in a class this large, but I really encourage people to participate as much as possible. I've never had a year in this class where there's been too much participation. I've had every single year too little participation. So please follow up with questions, things like that. And then finally, the third point about my teaching style is I have a bad tendency to use the term guys in a gender-neutral sense. So when I say guys, I don't mean men. I mean economic agents, people, everyone. And I'm sorry, guys is a gendered word. Often, I don't mean it that way. It's just kind of economist talk for economic agents. We call them guys. What we're going to do today is talk about what is microeconomics. What are you going to learn in this course? What is the basic field about? And then we'll dive in next time into actually starting to learn about the models that make up basic microeconomics. Microeconomics is fundamentally, in a sentence, the study of how individuals and firms make themselves as well off as possible in a world of scarcity. It's how individuals and firms make themselves as well off as possible in a world of scarcity. Scarcity is key. The core of microeconomics is constrained optimization. Basically, individuals or firms assessing the trade-offs they face every day in the decisions they make, and then trying to decide the best decision given those trade-offs. So that is, microeconomics is really about trade-offs. Microeconomics is really about you can't have it all, so what are you going to do with what you can have? How are you best going to use your limited resources? And the key concept behind all this, I'm going to say about 100 times, this is one of the most important concepts in economics, I'm sorry about that, but this is really one of the most important concepts in economics, is the concept of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. Okay? And opportunity cost is the notion that every action or inaction has costs in terms of what you could have done instead, in terms of the next best opportunity. If you buy a shirt, you are forgoing spending that money on buying something else. So if you're deciding between shirts and pants, you buy the shirt, you're forgoing buying the pair of pants. If you study, if you spend all night studying, you're forgoing the opportunity to go see a band you like in concert, and vice versa. Every action you take is a trade-off. Every decision you make involves a trade-off because there's always an opportunity cost. There's always something you could have done instead. Yeah? Great question. Actually, let me come back to that in 1 minute. I'm going to come back to that. Or 5 minutes. Okay, so this is why economics is called the dismal science. We're called the dismal science because the role of the economist is to basically say, well, you think that's free, but it's not. You think you can just relax and watch TV, but you know, by watching TV, you're giving up the opportunity to study, the opportunity to go out to see a concert, or the opportunity to do something else. Okay, so that's why I call it dismal science. Now, some people may call it dismal, I call it fun, and maybe that's because I was an MIT undergraduate. And what is an engineering school but the land of constrained optimization? That's what engineering and science is. It's all about what engineering is. It's constrained optimization. What better example could there be than the 2007 contests, where you're given a set of materials and asked to build something? That's a constrained optimization exercise. Indeed, economics was invented, modern economics was invented at MIT by the economist Paul Samuelson, who essentially said the mathematics that science and engineers use can be applied to analyze really the sort of essay-like approach that people had taken to economics before him. So he basically brought the tools of science economics and basically developed the course I'll teach today and the course that's taught all over the world. Was developed right here at MIT. Modern economics was born here because we introduced the tools of constrained optimization. Now, over here I'm usually going to try to do like an outline of what we're covering. So we talked about course details, what is micro I just did. Now let's talk about how we do that, what economics does, which is we use models. And I'm talking about a model of